Hi, everybody. This is Nilsa.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? I'm walking with the phone. That's why I don't have my video on.
Okay.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to see you and Carly and everybody working together the way you do. And congratulations on such a great product. And Carly's presentation was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Did you hear me? We need one more person for quorum, and then I said hi, Nelsa.
Hey, Carly, congratulations on such a great job at the executive committee meeting and all that, but you always do a great job. So I don't need to continue pat you on the back, but it's nice to hear, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have quorum.
Thank you, Carly. Good evening, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you for coming tonight to our Statement of District Needs and Budget Requests meeting. At this time, I'm going to start the meeting. So I'm going to call to order. Welcome to the to the September 30th, 2021 meeting of CB11's Statement of District Needs and Budget Requests Committee. My name is Jason Villanueva, and I am the chair of the committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:35 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by the Assistant District Manager, Carly Muscane, the staff liaison, Carly Wine, the staff liaison to our committee. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. CB11 members, if you have a question about board business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear and you should find the raise hand function there. If you're still having technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty to the staff. Members should not engage in a back and forth discussion. The chair will recognize the next person to speak. The chat function should not be used for CB11 business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated out loud on the record during the meeting. When a member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. Please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. Members of the public, if you have a question or comment about the subjects on the agenda, please raise your hand through Zoom and wait to be recognized. We will now take attendance by roll call.
Arroyo. Brown,
Present.
Green.
Here.
Malave,
Here.
Niccolo. Morris. Padilla,
Presente.
Perez,
Present.
Santiago,
Present.
Villanueva,
Present.
Wu. Okay, we have quorum, and welcome to all the new committee members. Oh, I see that Jessica Morris just joined. When you have a moment, Jessica, just confirm your attendance. Doesn't look like she's connected to the mic, so we can move forward, and once she's connected, she can confirm her attendance.
Perfect. Thank you. So prior to us moving into business with the adoption of the agenda, I too want to, congratulate and welcome all the new members that have joined the committee: Malik McCullough, Jessica Morris, Yolanda Brown, and Arturo Perez. Again, welcome. We look forward to working with you and to your service. And just to give some substance, this is a part of the work plan with the vice chair initiative of us having the liaisons back and forth between the committees and the SDN committee. We, through just trial and error and experience, we understood that it was best fit to ensure that, committee leadership was present, and who better than the vice chairs that get, all the groundwork done to ensure us chairs can properly conduct the meeting. So I definitely wanted to give kudos and, most importantly, congratulate and welcome you all to the committee. And I also wanted to take a moment to congratulate Giselle Malave and Andrew Padilla on their appointments as vice chairs to their respective committees. So I also wanted to take that moment as well. So moving forward, to keep business in sync, a lot of you who have been to the meeting or who are already a part of the committee understand that I try my best to keep in time with the hour time frame to respect your time, but more importantly, to ensure that we get business conducted efficiently. There's always spaces for discussion. There's spaces for conversations. You'll see I'm a very active and engaged chair. So please, if you need to call me, I just was having a conversation with Giselle 20 minutes before the meeting. You can always call me and I will ensure that we get that communication into the right hands. So moving on along to the agenda portion. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and was posted online. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Committee members, if you object to adopt the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Okay. Seeing no objections, for the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. So we were sent, I know it's been a while since we have meetings. I got spoiled with the world of YouTube for our meetings. So I'm definitely working on the stuff we did from January to May, but Carly was kind enough to get out June's meeting minute package out to us earlier today. So we'll go into that process of the agenda. The minutes from our last meeting were distributed to committee members ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the meetings from that meeting. We'll adopt the minutes from that meeting. Committee members, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. I don't see, so forgive me, I'm blind, so I'm like blowing up windows, closing them to read the stuff out. So just bear with me. And of course, when you change windows, you lose where you were. Seeing no objections to the minutes from the last committee meeting, are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB11 website. So we can move on to the rest of our agenda. Announcements. The District Needs and Budget Committee will meet next on Wednesday, October 20th at 6:30 p.m. Just a red flag to the vice chairs, which we'll have a little discussion about. We also want to ensure that all the budget requests are submitted before that date. So use that as a target date. Those that are newer, we'll get into that. Not too much tonight, but we'll be able to talk. And those that are new to the committee but have been part of the board, you know that October is draft budget submission request month. So we want to make sure that all that data is submitted by our committees to the office. So then that way executive has an opportunity to look at it before we do as a committee. So next. Excellent. So presentations is discussions. We'll have a summary of the public input survey. Carly's going to give a beautiful presentation that I was able to look at a little while earlier. Some of you have seen the presentations already throughout the month from your prospective committee. This is going to summarize the efforts put forth by the board and the survey that was conducted over the summer. Thank you all to those that participate, public, board members. I need not tell you, this process has allowed a lot more understanding of the process. So and particularly in what the interests and concerns are of our district. So I want to congratulate everyone involved. And most importantly, I definitely want to give a special kudos to Carly for putting this stuff together and making sure that, you know, we stay in line and it's succinct. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Carly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. And hi again, everybody. So if you've attended your committee meetings this month, you'll have seen this presentation already. And if you've attended multiple committees this month, then you've seen this presentation a bunch of times over and over again. But tonight's presentation is going to be a little bit different. As Jason mentioned, this is the summary of public input, the summary of the public input efforts that were the efforts that occurred over the summer. Okay. So as I mentioned, tonight's presentation is going to be a little bit different. We are going to briefly touch upon the context and the overview, and then the goals for tonight's meeting, again, different from other meetings. Then I am going to share with you some updated survey data for the most pressing needs overall. Last night I presented this to the executive committee, but there was a little bit of a mistake in the graph, so I adjusted it for tonight. And then we're going to get into the survey results by policy area and also touch upon the results of yesterday's executive committee meeting, what the executive committee settled on for the most important issue for each policy area. And then we're going to talk about next steps and dive in a little bit deeper about what those next steps mean for you as vice chairs of your committee and committee members of this district needs and budget committee. So earlier, a couple weeks ago, I distributed our annual district needs and budget process and timeline. Hopefully you've all reviewed it. As Jason mentioned, and as those of you who were on this committee previously know, we have worked to fine tune our process to incorporate a community engagement strategy. And this public input survey was a part of that community engagement strategy. We collected responses for 2 months and received a total of 235 responses, which we're really pleased about. We also held a town hall in August. We received 18 total comments. 13 were from the public, 5 were from board members, and the video is available for viewing both on our website and on YouTube. We also conducted regular outreach. We included the survey and our different efforts on our weekly newsletter and social media posts. We worked with our local elected officials and local community-based organizations to utilize their communication channels to promote our survey. We also promoted the survey and the town hall and this meeting on Link NYC across on all of the kiosks across our district. And then we were able to do one community canvas day with Uptown Grand Central, and that actually received a lot of responses. We received a total of 28 responses from that one day. Definitely something to look out for in the future, for future years, is to incorporate more community canvases day, and that will require some more hands-on effort from our committee members and our board members. So the goals of tonight's meeting is to first summarize public input survey results. We're going to focus purely on the most important issues, the most pressing needs and the most important issues. We're not going to dive into all of the context and all of the thorough data. I sent over the full comprehensive report yesterday. I'm actually going to resend the report with the correct most pressing needs survey results. The second goal is to report back on the executive committee selections of the most pressing issues overall and the most important issue for each policy area. And then finally, hopefully you as committee members will feel prepared for the next steps. So here is the updated chart for the most pressing needs overall. The top 3 selections were crime and public safety, affordable housing, and homelessness. We also received a number of responses for economic development and recovery, and let's see, quality of life issues, and trash removal and cleanliness. And then there were also a significant number of responses for police community relations, for land use trends, for schools, and for youth and children's services. The last year, for fiscal year 2022, the most pressing needs that were selected by our board were affordable housing, land use trends, and unemployment. This year, last night, the executive committee decided to, after an extensive discussion, they decided to ultimately agree with the public input and select the top 3 issues that the public selected as the top most pressing needs for our community board. We're going to dive into the healthcare and human services policy area. This encompasses the work of DOHMH, of H&H, of Department for the Aging, Human Resources Administration, and the Department of Homeless Services. This policy area, mostly human services deals with this policy area, but there is an element of housing with the homeless services. That's something the Housing Committee also discusses. So the most important issue that was selected for the healthcare and human services policy area was mental health and substance abuse treatment and prevention programs. And ultimately, the executive committee decided to select mental health and substance abuse treatment and prevention programs as the most important issue for this policy area at the recommendation of the Human Services Committee. Youth education and child welfare, that encompasses the work of the Youth and Education Committee, and the agencies that correspond to this policy area are the Department of Education, School Construction Authority, Administration of Children's Services, and the Department of Youth and Community Development. The public selected after school programs as the most important issue. It was more varied. A close second was juvenile justice and services for at-risk youth. And a close third was youth workforce development and summer youth employment. I mention all of this because in the selection for after-school programs, basically these issues all tied into each other. A lot of respondents selected after-school programs as the most important issue because of because ultimately they view engagement as the best way to deter youth crime and youth crew involvement. Last year, the Youth and Education Committee selected educational attainment as the most important issue. This year, they ultimately decided to agree with the public input, and they recommended that the Executive Committee select after-school programs as the most important issue, and ultimately, they did select that as the most important issue. Public safety and emergency services encompasses the work of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee. NYPD is included in this policy area, as is the fire department. There was a tie for the most important issue. The public selected both crime prevention programs and police community relations as the most important issue. Ultimately, though, the Public Safety and Transportation Committee decided to recommend crime prevention programs as the most important issue for fiscal year 2023. Last year, they selected youth crime. Similar to youth and education, the crime prevention programs that the committee discussed were more alternatives, programming for youth. The next policy area is core infrastructure, city services, and resiliency. The Environment, Open Space, and Parks Committee worked on this policy area. This encompasses the work of the Department of Sanitation and the Department of Environmental Protection. Overwhelmingly, the most important issue that the public selected was cleanliness and trash collection. Nearly half of respondents selected this as the top issue. And last year, we also selected that as the top issue. And this year, both the Environment, Open Space, and Parks Committee and the Executive Committee agree that this is the most important issue. And I'm just going to mute. Okay. Next policy area is housing, economic development, and land use. This policy area encompasses the work of three committees: the Housing Committee, the Land Use, Landmarks, and Planning Committee, and the Economic Development and Culture Committee, and spans the work of multiple agencies, including Department of City Planning, the Department of Buildings, the Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, NYCHA, EDC, and Small Business Services. The top selected issue was affordable housing creation, and the second top selected issue was affordable housing preservation. However, if you take a look at the survey responses that I did send over yesterday and the presentation that I sent over as well, a lot of those answers, a lot of the people who selected those two answers, their responses kind of overlapped and they were really related. Ultimately, the Executive Committee decided to choose affordable housing preservation as the most important issue. They also selected preservation as the most important issue for fiscal year 2022. Transportation and mobility encompasses the work of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee, and the agencies that correspond to this policy area are DOT, New York City Transit, and Taxi and Limousine Commission. So for this policy area, the top selected issue by the public was the pedestrian safety. The second was bicycle network, which includes bike lane, signage, bike safety, etc. And the third most selected issue was subway service and quality. And the fourth, there was a tie. I went this far down this list to mention that traffic safety and enforcement, that was the fourth most selected issue. However, the Public Safety and Transportation Committee decided to select that as the most important issue for fiscal year 23 as it relates to transportation and mobility, considering that a lot of the responses about pedestrian safety and even, bicycle network were related specifically to the lack of enforcement, the lack of traffic enforcement, leading to issues with pedestrian safety. So the committee decided to be strategic and select that as the most important issue. Last year, they selected bus service and quality. And then finally, the parks, cultural, and other community facilities. This also encompasses the work of, or spans the work of multiple committees, including Environment, Open Space, and Parks Committee, and the Economic Development and Culture Committee. And the agencies that this policy area encompasses includes New York City Parks, New York Public Library, Department of Cultural Affairs, Department of Citywide Administrative Services, and Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications. So So the top selected issue was park care and maintenance. And that selected issue also tied in greatly to the quality of parks and parks facility and park safety. Ultimately, the committee, both the Environment, Open Space and Parks Committee and the Executive Committee went with park care and maintenance as the top selected issue. And that was also the top selected issue last year. I am going to leave some room for questions following these next few slides. I just want to get through this first. So, we're in September. Each committee reviewed the public input. They each gave feedback and submitted their recommendations for the most important issue for the Executive Committee. And then, last night, the Executive Committee reviewed all of the most pressing needs, the most important issue, and then voted on the final selection. Now we're here tonight. We are hosting our public hearing following this presentation and following your questions. Once tonight completes, the staff is going to work on the statement of district needs. What I wanted to highlight was your role, the committee's role in discussing the budget requests during the October meetings. And then the full board is going to vote on the final statement of district needs and budget requests at our October meeting. Okay, so I pulled some language from our work plan, which was also sent to you prior to this meeting. So for October, the committees are tasked with preparing budget requests, reviewing budget requests from the prior fiscal year and making recommendations for additions and removals. And I wanted to highlight that all of the guidance about the addition and removals is going to come from the committee. The role of the staff liaisons and the budget liaisons, which is your roles, your role as committee members of this committee, your role is to serve as a point of reference.
Carly, I'm sorry to interject. I think this slide is so monumental. I know we're going to send the presentations out with the meeting minute package, but if we could just send this slide to the members, so as a quick reference, maybe like separate from the presentation. I think I can't speak for the newer members or the older members, but I know if I just came on this committee, this right here would definitely bring me up to speed on expectations for the next 30 days.
Great. Great. So yeah, I'm going to run through this and then I'm going to pull up some other, I'm going to share my screen, pull up some other documents, pull up the budget request tracker, just so you all know what I'm referencing here. But yeah, so there's a budget request tracker that is going to be distributed to you as part of your other committees, and I will distribute it to you following or tomorrow if you haven't already received it. And so there's like a larger document that has all of the requests, and then there are multiple sheets organized by committee rather than by policy area. So each committee has their own sheet with all of the budget requests that correspond to their committee from the previous fiscal year. In each committee sheet, there are 2 additional columns. Well, so we have our previous budget requests, then we have the adopted budget response from the last cycle, and then the staff is going to make a recommendation for addition, removal, revision, just to help facilitate the conversation. And then ultimately the committee at your committee meetings are going to produce a recommendation. I included this little equation here just to show you all of like the different documents, all the different things to take into consideration as we formulate our budget request. So of course we want to take into consideration the public input that is informing our statement of district needs, and that basically convey our district needs. But we also have our district budget consultations and our borough budget consultations. We had them with most agencies, and for the borough budget consultations, we're not through them all yet, but we will be soon. And basically, it's just like questions that we ask agencies to help facilitate our understanding of what their needs are and how we should organize our budget requests, what we should take into consideration. I mean, we also have been, you've been meeting with your committees regularly. Aside from the summer months, you've been meeting with them every month. You should certainly be using the discussions that have come out of those committees to I guess, inform your requests for that, for the upcoming fiscal year. And then there are some documents to help you with that request. There is a budget request reference guide. I know that, some people have, raised questions about the content of the public input survey, the content of even, the budget requests that come out of our committee. But the reality is that we're working from like a pre-made form from the Department of City Planning, and they have provided us with a list of budget requests that we can choose from. So it's really important to take a look at that prior to creating requests. And as budget liaisons, it's really important that you take a look at that prior to your meeting so that you can be effective in your role as budget liaison and be accurate in your recommendations to the committee. And then there's also tips to strengthen submissions, and taking all of them into consideration, that should inform the budget request for fiscal year 23. I just want to show you, some of those documents in case you haven't seen them. So first, I am going to show you the budget request form. Just give me a moment here. Okay, so this is what that looks like. I just created this today. So this is all of our budget requests from last year. These are the responses that we're still filling in, but I filled them in for public safety. So I'm just going to go to that slide, to that sheet. Yeah, so the adopted budget, this is the response we got. Ultimately, as a staff liaison, I'm going to make a recommendation to help facilitate the conversation. And then the committee will ultimately make a recommendation. And if there's a revision, you can include it here. There's also, of course, you can add budget requests. We're not limited to that, which we submitted last year. I also wanted to show you the, stop share. Reference guide. So this is what the Department of City Planning sent us. Each policy area and each agency has a set list. So here are the policy areas and the agencies that fall within that policy area. And each agency has a set list of budget requests. Of course, there's capital and expense. So this is what we're working from. And, if you want to add a new request that correlates to a need that has been stated throughout our committee meetings and in the public input, you would come to this sheet and select from this sheet. We are operating within guidelines. And then I also just wanted to show you the tips to strengthen submissions. This includes tips for the statement of district needs. It also includes tips for the budget requests. It's a quick read. It's worth the read. And okay, I am going to go back to the presentation, and I would love to take questions. Let me just get there. Here we go. So yeah, I would love to take any questions. Okay, Jessica, I see your hand is raised, so you can go first, and then Xavier will go.
I always have an outside the box question. Carly, thank you again for seeing this again and seeing it more comprehensively every time I see it again. My comment or question or inquiry is the policy area that falls squarely with public safety that encompasses NYPD and FDNY. There is no policy area for like disaster emergency or disaster response, or is there and we just don't see it? In which case, I would say that we are in an extraordinary time where pointing to that being a place that had significant impact from the recent disaster and averted disaster with Sandy and the tides might look to point at something that relates to disaster relief as important to identify, which we may have missed.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jessica, for that question. And you have raised that before, and I actually did look into it and I forgot to include it. So amazingly, you're correct. The work of OEM, the Office of Emergency Management, does not fall into any of these policy areas. It falls into the other category. Frankly, I don't really understand why. We are operating within, guidelines, but there is room for feedback to the Department of City Planning, and I do have that on my list of things to mention to them. And that goes for anything else that any of you feel is missed throughout this process. Please let me know, and I will relay that message. But yeah, so it's not within any of these policy areas, but interestingly, or maybe not surprisingly though, for the public input, we saw the issue of climate change come up throughout in multiple policy areas. And I would say it came up in, let me just take a look at them all again, so I know what I'm dealing with. It came up in public safety and emergency services, core infrastructure, city services and resiliency, and parks, cultural, and other community facilities. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. So even though it doesn't fall within any of these policy areas, perhaps that's why, because it comes up in multiple, because it like intersects, but it doesn't necessarily like it. I do agree that it feels like it's been lost in this process. So it's something to consider for next year or for the feedback to Department of City Planning. Does anyone else have any, do you have anything else to say in response to that, Jessica, or can I move on to Xavier?
A phone call dropped. Xavier?
Carly, thank you to you and Angel and Marlene for constantly putting in grade A level. Sorry, Duncan agrees. He thinks you're doing a great job. Barking in the background. This is brilliant. One of the things I would say coming out of executive that was observed was the intersectionality of complaints or requests and how that dovetails with our choices. And I think when Jessica just mentioned when it comes to the environmental impact, we're dealing with a very antiquated model of assessing and filling, for lack of a better term, filling in the blanks or the drop-down menu and what we have to select, and then elaborating on that. So I think first, you've done a brilliant job. This has been a long time coming since we changed the bylaws. It's been a pleasure working with Jason as well as we flesh this out and seeing it evolve. So thank you very much. I think it's increased to an accessibility level for the public that we have more participation. People now understand the wonky nature of the city budgeting process. I would like to say, what other ways would you recommend or that we can proceed? And I have my own thoughts on it, but that as we evolve this process, what I've been hearing collectively over, not just this cycle, but previous cycles, is that we will need to find another mechanism to advocate for our ever-changing needs, as Jessica alluded to with the environment, the flood zones, we've discussed ad nausea. Our housing, if you have the one slide where we had an executive committee where we had affordable housing and homelessness, right? They've been separated. And then public safety is an issue. And as we discussed last night, how the committee came to the conclusion that the enforcement mechanism was the best choice with public safety and transportation versus youth and education, which was more of a preventative measure. And I think that the COVID pandemic has ripped this the Band-Aid and scab off with it, with our social inequities of this neighborhood. So I think as we go into the next 30 days, as Jason discussed about and reminding our membership, we should find ways to continue our advocacy, because it's not, the budget process doesn't just stop when we vote on it, when we commit as committees weigh in. I want to make sure that we're constantly pressing the gas. So I'd like to hear from you, as we now are 4 or 5 years in the making, now having a fully populated committee, how we can move forward with this and keep pushing our membership to advocate, step in, so that we're constantly being foremost in the minds of the agencies. A lot of loaded questions there.
Wait, so your question is how can we push our advocacy efforts beyond the budget process, beyond this budget process?
So there are multiple questions. So the first one, let's start. We go through the 30-day process, we vote, we make our selections, and then I would like to see, and working with tandem with our chair of this committee, Jason Villanueva, and how we keep our advocacy up throughout the process. So it's not just then going to the district consultations and all that, how we can constantly be foremost in the minds of each agency as we advocate for these requests with our council members, and making sure all our membership is like, hey, I'm knocking on the door, prioritize this like they do in other community boards, but everyone has a different methodology. And also too, the other council members in certain districts are not as accessible. Diana is very accessible. I could call her up right now if I needed to, which is why she's showing up to Human Services next month. So again, it's about activation as a question.
Yeah. So this, that's a loaded question. And I think that this is like the crux of what our committee, what this committee like should be discussing. So thank you for raising it. Of course, I don't have all of the answers. I do think that, so this budget process is just one way for the community board to advocate for our needs. I think it's a really important way, especially because the statement of district needs is supposed to be a policy document that comes out of the community board, essentially a needs assessment document. So it's a really important way to advocate for our needs, but you're right, it doesn't stop at the budget request. And, you know, the reality is that our role in the budget process is advisory. So our advocacy cannot, stop at the budget requests. Right now we're in this process. So I think it's like really important that we invest all of our effort like this month in this process. With that said, I think that as I was reading through the survey results and doing the analysis, I just kept thinking about how helpful that the survey has been in furthering my understanding of what the needs of East Harlem are, and also, make it kind of made me think ahead to I kept thinking about how we can use that document to set the agendas for all of our committee meetings. So, for example, I guess you mentioned human services, and We received a lot of responses about the needs as it relates to health and human services. And we also saw a lot of varied responses. We saw a lot of the same responses, but there was variety. And to me, that says that like the Human Services Committee needs to explore these issues from a lot of different angles. And it offers the community board, in my opinion, an opportunity to be a leader in the conversations about those issues. So I feel like that was kind of long-winded. I think that, setting our budget request and continuing to advocate for them, not just to the agencies, but also to our elected officials, because the reality is that a lot of our agencies are limited in their funding and rely on elected officials to provide them with extra funding to address certain issues. So that's just one way. But the other way is, I think that the community board, there's opportunity for the community board to be like a thought leader in East Harlem as it relates to a lot of different issues. But those are just some of my ideas. I would love to hear from the committee members, and I would love to hear from others to see what they think, not just about what I shared, but also just personally what they think. But
Thank
yeah.
you, Carly.
Thank you.
Before we
Thank you, Jason. Thank you,
yeah,
Carly. I'll let you
um,
support from there.
thank you, Xavier. So does anybody else, before we ask a new question, and I'm really hinting out to Arturo and Andrew, does anybody have some input that they would like to share as to to add some best case practices with community engagement, which is pretty much what's being discussed right now, right? With networking with the politicians, with networking with our administrative agencies, networking with our CBOs, to rally a position and then to ultimately advocate all the way to City Hall. So if no one has a response, I'll just chime in, Xavier. As you know, the process, when we first drive this committee 5 years ago, there was no process, there was no system. 5 years later, not only do we got a process, we got a system, and we have God's gift to man with our staff liaison. So the formal processes, I was just driving down, right? October submission, February, we get the response back to that submission. I could be off a month or two, guys. We respond to that response in April, and then we get the executive response. The point that I'm emphasizing is that there's time in between the formal processes that allow a lot of informal opportunity to ensure that, one, that we're advocating, and probably better yet, that we're engaging with both the elected officials and the community-based organizations. When I say that, I'm going to wrap the admin agencies as well in there. So I think it's one of the best things that has been done in the last 3 months that I found challenging in the past 4 or 5 years is appointing the vice chairs of all the committees to this committee. I think it keeps it succinct. I think that was a great decision by both executive staff and leadership. I think it was even a more phenomenal decision that the board supported that. And I think that movement, and of course, a lot of it's thinking, so we're speculating. And the point is, hopefully, with the engagement of that leadership, we're able to further voice the concerns and complaints that are brought forth to this body. So that's a little of my piece, which is advocate. There's nothing wrong with us having a conversation before the meeting. As Xavier has taught me, that sometimes you need meetings before the meeting, and then you need a meeting after the meeting, so that way you're up to speed on what's going on, and more importantly, the process, like what was brought up at full board, and with the quality of life, and residents expressing their concern to the elected official, and the elected official plainly expressing that's above my pay grade. And that, to me, shouldn't be dismissed or dismayed. That's hopeful information for us to now figure out what's the next level that we have to do. And I guess the whole point that I'm making, I'm sorry if I went off is we need networking and community engagement by our membership, and they need to be plugged in. So I saw Arturo hand up. So I'll go in the order of Arturo, Andrew, Giselle, and then John. Arturo, please. Welcome to the committee. Sir.
Okay. Hi, thanks. Thanks for that, Jason and Carly. I think you kind of answered a question I had, but I'm not quite sure. I'm new to this committee, and actually I'm pretty new to the community board in general. But my question is really a very basic question. It's okay, so we do all this budget work, and then we make the budget request to the City Planning Commission. And then what? I mean, is this really making a difference, or is it just a paper exercise? I mean, I appreciate that we're thought leaders, but I just want some assurance that it's more than that, that this is really going to make a difference, all this work that we're doing. And you know, and is there like a concrete example of a budget request that went through and really did something? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, thank you. And that is a really important question. It's like one that I struggled with as the committee was trying to build out our community engagement efforts. Like, we're asking our community to do so much work and filling out the survey when in reality it is an advisory process. But the another side, a truth to that reality is that, you know, it might not be immediate, but we have had a number of requests be funded as a result of advocating for them year after year after year. So, I mean, most recently, what comes to mind, because it was the most recent example, was for years, Community Board 11 has submitted a request not only for the repairs of the full East River Esplanade, but also for the reconstruction of the 107th Street Pier. As of last year, or like when I started, as of last year, there were no plans for the city to reconstruct the pier. Like, you know, we had a feeling that they were gonna put funding into the full Esplanade because the mayor has, you know, a goal to connect the full waterfront. But we were told that we did not have enough funding for the pier to be included in that. But, you know, over the summer, the mayor did announce funding for the full Esplanade. That includes money for the pier, and that's just one example. So, you know, it does feel like a really tiring, extensive process for, you know, what is given to us in return. And I think that there is a lot of room for improvement for, you know, the impact or for how far this process goes. Like, I know that in the past we've had agencies recycle responses to us. Elected officials have told us that, you know, they haven't read our statement of district needs. So there is a lot of room for improvement and like a need for us to continue pushing it and forcing them to take it seriously. But it's not to say that like all hope is lost. Because it's not. Like it does ultimately serve as like a policy document, like a mission statement for our community board, and it has resulted in funding. But it is a really important question you ask, and one that I think that the committee should keep at the forefront of our minds, because there is a lot of room for improvement as far as, you know, how seriously agencies and elected officials take us. So, but I think I have optimism that, you know, with improving this process at our community board level, it will drive more people to listen to us. But I really do appreciate that question, because I've struggled with it too.
And I'll jump in as a board member, right? Let alone chair. First 2 years of this committee, I saw nothing. First 24 months, we didn't have a staff liaison. We were going back and forth. There's a lot of challenges. Long story short, 3 years since, on top of the pier, there's just a slew of items that if you go through those budget request trackers, Arturo, I promise you, you'll see a lot of the success. It's not as much, right? If we submit 100 items, we'll get 3. Most of the time they'll say that's already funded or already allocated. And that's kind of where I agree with Carly, that the response may be germane, but that's what, to me, I've taken the challenge and the mindset that we need to be more sharper and direct with our requests. Sometimes our requests are just so vast for the entire city, they don't just serve like our area, right? And I think you could be very instrumental to that direction for not only the board, but for human services. There's a lot of quality of life concerns and challenges that have been brought up the last 6 months. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to advocate. It's not gonna happen in a day. It's no different than breaking a bad habit. The city, their government, you guys, some of you know this better than me. It takes 5-10 years to get some stuff done. But I will say, being a part of the process, understanding the process, and now even evolving the system, I do see where pretty much we get a solution for our problem. May not be exactly what we want, but it definitely, this process has helped. And a lot of the times, just like Jessica brought up in the chat, the politicians use this document to justify the positions that they're taking on the floor, whether it's the city council, state assembly. So yeah, the point is, we're not working for no reason. It's just like watching paint dry. It takes a long time. So yeah, I just want to share my experience. I knew it was a challenge the first 2 years of doing this. I used to even ask the chair, Nosa, you can ask Nosa, but why, or even times I sit with staff and I'd be like, do we really need a district needs committee? And the reality is we should have always had it, so we could constantly advocate for this district, just as important as we like to advocate the land use or constituent services. So that's my piece, and I hope it answers your question.
Great,
Thank
thanks, thank you.
Yeah, if you don't mind me chiming in to give a little bit of perspective, I haven't been involved in sports since 08, 09. And I think watching paint dry is a good analogy to apply to it. We have the Thomas Jefferson Park that just got a ribbon cut this summer, or actually right before we went in some in their late spring. That got funded almost 10 years ago. You look at requests for replacing heating or for hot water and NYCHA, and it'll say partially funded. Those funds get appropriated and held until it can be fully funded, and then they can begin the capital improvement. So these are the various aspects when the city budgeting process and us weighing in, and why it can take so long to have things funded. It's not just trying to put in a stoplight or a stop sign. And it takes time for us to see the fruit of that labor. So I think, and then once we made that request and they acknowledge the request is validated, then begins our advocacy. And I think the other thing too, that we have to pull the curtain back, showing how the sausage is made, is that there is an intersectionality when it comes to the city budgeting process and the state budget process and appropriation of funds. And even, and that, again, I use the word dovetail with our federal government. And that because we are such an important capital of America, all three of these government bodies influence and play a part. And that's why we have to educate our population and show how they need to be involved and where they need to focus their efforts, and where the city can advocate, where we can advocate at the state, and then where we need to go to our federal leadership. And that's very important in that process, and which is why I've always said that, you get on the community board, the two documents you should read, which is the Power Broker, which talks about Robert Moses, which shows about the functionality and dysfunctionality in New York, and then the city charter. And that kind of like gives you a really deep dive on it. But I think I hope that answers your question in a non overly wonky way. But it does happen. We do see the fruits of our labor. Some are more rapid than others. And so that's it. Anyway, thank you,
Xavier. I want to move the meeting on. if no one else minds. I do love the Q&A about process, protocols, procedures, but again, as I told you in the beginning, I want to respect your time, and we're already over. So with that said, I want to jump into the next few questions, and then after that, get into I always forget the word for some reason, the public portion of the meeting. Andrew.
Oh, I'm sorry. This was a quick response to Arturo, if that's okay.
No problem. Just quick,
Um,
30 seconds.
Oh, Jesus. Well, I just pressing electeds and broadening survey responses, I think, is the best we can do going forward. Obviously, in these next 30 days, I think we need to focus on the process that we have laid out. But pressing electeds, and not just electeds that aren't even in our district. I mean, we hear a lot about the highest we hear a lot of complaints about public safety issues in the neighborhood. We have the highest concentration of drug rehab facilities in the city, and people sometimes think that only police can solve that, or so they complain to the precinct, or they complain to a local elected thinking only they can solve that. And we've had those facilities in this neighborhood as long as I've lived here, because other districts don't want them. And so as we've had meetings with Kalos and other electeds, we see that it's not just about getting mad at local elected leadership. It's about making sure that there is a fair share throughout the city of where these facilities are placed. Not just for the communities that they're placed in, but for the people who are in these facilities, that they don't have to be so detached from their communities in order to receive services. And so, it's not just it's about pressing folks, but also about understanding that, sometimes our electeds are the ones who need to be pressed, and sometimes they need us to help press other folks. And so it's that combination as well. And broadening survey responses. I mean, we did that this time. We got over 200 responses. But East Harlem has over 100,000 people, and his board members were only about 40 something people, right? So we need to get broader and reach out to people who wouldn't normally come to these meetings, who don't think it's worth their time, who care about climate change or police brutality, and don't feel like this is a space where anything's going to be done on that, right? We did tabling in the street this time. We need more of that. We need tabling at CBOs, community events. And those people who are distrusting of a CB may not even know what it is, may not go to a meeting. They might fill out a survey if we meet them where they're at. And I think that survey, broadening that out, I think that's going to bring more people in to our time and effort. But this requires time and effort, and it's free time. It's free time and effort with no promises that any of it works out. And unfortunately, that's the work we do. But that's no matter what community work we do, there's not going to be a promise that it works out, and it's going to be usually free.
Thank you, Andrew. That was so well said. I'll give you a pass on the 30 seconds. That was great. He hit it on the head. And again, if you look at the left side at the bottom end, that's why I said I also pushed out to everybody. I really love the slide that Carly just left up. Public input, district budget consultations, borough budget consultation, committee discussions. We could think about city council and other avenues, as Andrew brought up greatly, for us to advocate on behalf of the district, and more importantly, to be servants, right, to our people. You only get back what you put in. John, Mr. Green.
I'm not a question really said, just reiterate something that you said a few minutes ago. Government runs, it runs like molasses going uphill in February. And sometimes it's basically our job to kind of push it along. And the thing is that's what, this is really the first part of it with these budget requests. Now, another thing that you said, Jason, is that with getting to the electeds, the thing is, it's a great thing to do that this year because there's going to be a lot of new electeds, because of the 4 districts that we cover, I think 2 of them are getting new city council members. So the thing is that if we can get to them early and let them know how we feel about certain issues, the thing is that it might help.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate your sentiment. Xavier, I'm assuming it's from previous, or do you have another question? Okay, Carly, we'll move on.
I see a hand raised from Jessica, and I know she was having some difficulties speaking before, so I just want to give her, is it okay if I give her the opportunity to speak? Oh, and Giselle also has her hand raised.
Okay. Go ahead, Jessica, then Giselle.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good. Sorry. 2 cents in the hat, and yes, I am having connectivity issues. My apologies. And I think Andrew's point is a point well taken. Clearly, I think we're all wowed by how much information we have and how useful it is. At the same time, it is a particular group of responsive residents, and that is to be acknowledged. At the same time, I think to Xavier's earlier point about how do we keep doing this work outside of this very specific and narrow restrictive process, in order to maximize the outcomes of that narrow restrictive process, we have to be strategic in a lot of ways that may not be direct correlation to the data, but that is coming from a set of knowledge of how things work, who responds, where funds come from, and how all those things add up to getting the most for what the district needs now and in an immediate term. So obviously there's always the approach to go one-to-one and sort of following exactly data that comes in is what goes out, and we're going to stick to that. But I think this interpretation and responsibility of the committees to really consider, and public safety did this in recognizing that advocating for accessibility in large infrastructure transportation projects is not something that is controlled by the city budget. So we wouldn't get very far. So I think at some point down the line, a little bit more clarification on where we might gain traction by prioritizing and where we may care and have a real strong need, but not have enough traction, or this may not be the right place to put it in a sidebar for all of those other efforts, activities, meetings before meetings and after meetings before meetings that will need to happen, and be responsible for those things too, if they may not receive the direct correlating level of priority that survey results say they need, so that we can be accountable, but also down the line be able to show that this work continues and that this is not the only process by which we achieve getting what we need here in the district. So one-to-one is important in some ways, but also really thinking about how the system works and how we know it doesn't work, and making sure that we are working it as much as possible to really maximize the potential of what can be allocated to our district.
Thank you, Jessica. Well said.
Again, outside the box, my apologies.
No, listen, it's a part of the process. The beauty of the district needs process is, as much as there's a formal, rigid, standard process that gives us the opportunity to get on the trail, there are also ways to be informal that you kind of get off trail that are dynamic to the process. And this board and this committee has done that. You guys have all done that work in the last year. I mean, like I said, there was no community input survey. We did that. There was no budget consultations at the district level. We did that. They were, but they weren't, and I should say, they just, for lack of a better word, they weren't taken as seriously because the board members' participation wasn't as involved as it has been in the last 3 years. So it can only grow. And I challenge all of you to find more interesting, invigorating ways for us to have these seats at the tables, and more importantly, to advocate for our constituents, because it's paramount. Last year, we had a few written testimonies for city council. Maybe this year, a small goal, and we'll get into goals after we do the submission in October, but it may be a small goal this year is to get one representative from each committee to go on behalf of the district and testify. And we'll get into that because there's other opportunities and processes. And I guess the point that I'm making is, you know, to be presente, right? To be there. I think that's half the battle. The other half is the know-how. And, you know I'm committed. Carly's been committed. Xavier, as your vice chair, is committed. The vice chair of the board, and he's the vice chair of this committee. So that tells you, as much as I'm your chair here and your treasurer, that tells you the commitment you have and the interest in making sure that, I think the most important word is transparency. You know, it's not feeling like nothing's happening. And sometimes if you look at yourself, it may be because you're not active. So I challenge all of us to think in that matter. And I promise you, you'll bring something to the table that we've been trying to collectively bring together for the last few years. So Giselle.
I have a question about the format. Carly, I know that the format, let's say that we, like, for example, me last year when I sent Angel the request for the committee, the format that I used, I think it was helpful to me. He also mentioned that there's a letter that goes kind of like that first letter that you see before every committee. Are we responsible to write that letter as well on top of the same kind of responsibility we had last year?
So, so I think you're referring to the statement of district needs. Is that what you're referring
Yes.
to? Okay.
Yes.
So all of the feedback, so short answer before I get ahead of myself. Short answer is no. The staff is gonna, draft it based on the feedback from the committees, the public input, and all of that. And then we're gonna share it with the board, and you can recommend, revisions. If you feel like we missed anything, we can then include it. But just to streamline the process, we're going to do it. So that's a short answer. And then the committees will be responsible for making revisions or recommendations for additions to budget requests, to removals. The staff will, certainly provide recommendations, just some advice to help facilitate the conversation. But ultimately, what's coming, like what we submit is going to come out of the committees, and your role as the vice chair and as the staff, as the budget liaisons and committee members of this budget, is to serve as a point of reference. So we're going to share these two documents, the DCP budget request reference guide, and we're going to send all of this information to the entire committee. But ultimately, we're going to rely on you and, of course, the staff liaisons to be that point of reference, like the ones who have actually looked into it and done the homework, in the event that other board members are still confused. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And if anybody has ideas to like you said, because it's our responsibility to go back and hear from the committee members. If you, Carly, or anybody in the committee has ideas on how us, the vice chairs, and also the liaisons, can engage everyone without it just being us asking the question or opening up the floor, actually giving tasks that can not confuse the process, but just bring it kind of together so everybody kind of gets excited about the process, please drop it in the chat or let me know.
Carly,
so
let
I
me
could
jump
use
into that piece. I think that's a great sentiment, Giselle. And I think, and more important, I'd go back to the work plan. Give me a second, buddy. I'd go back to the work plan that was reviewed and approved by both this body and the board back in June. It's a part of our minute package that was sent out earlier that got approved. And I recommend everyone, because again, I know the summer hit. We're starting a new cycle, so a lot of this stuff is foggy, but the point is we have a way to ensure that everyone is on track and is up to par, and that work plan defines who's doing what. wow. And again, I'm not too concerned for, and forgive me, Giselle, because you are now a senior member on this committee. I'm more worried about some of our newer members because you've had that experience. I've had that experience where you have this barrage of data. And what we're trying to do is just keep it simple, not be as complex as we have been in the process. And ensure that at the end of the day, it's nothing that, at least from this body, because we have senior leadership with vice chairs on it, no one is not, they may not know the ins and out of what we do as a budget committee, but they're very up to speed on the budget process, because it's in the minute, it's in your agenda every month. So we'll talk about new tips and tricks and ways. One of the documents that was provided is the budget tracker. So I definitely would, it's the Bible, for lack of a better word, for us. So, outside of anything else that you guys figure to do for engagement, please run it by me or Carly, and we'll further figure out, more extensive ways to coordinate and collaborate, which I think which was brought up as well in executive yesterday, which hopefully when we get to old business, maybe Xavier could give us a little bit of up to speed note on that. No more questions on this, because now we're going into an hour and a half, and I want to give the public the opportunity to share. So Carly, if you don't have anything else, I don't see hands. I lie. I see Xavier's and Giselle's, but I know Xavier and Giselle don't mind waiting
No,
until
that's my
after
hand.
the
I'll lower
public.
it. I'll lower it.
They don't mind to wait till after the public speaks, right? And the public session, which again, forgive me, for some reason, the term couldn't come off my head, because that's the portion of the agenda. It's really a public hearing. We had our meetings this month. We did our budget town hall in July. Forgive me if I'm off. It was, I think, the July committee meeting. And that was before the survey, and that was before the meetings. To give you some substance, just to draw a picture. And now I'm talking to our committee members as just act like you don't know anything about Community Board 11 for 2 seconds. We had this budget town hall in July. We did the input survey July and August. And then you guys had your initial committee meetings in September. Everybody has met before today, even executive, even full board. With that said, this is an opportunity for the public that has digested this data for the last 2 months to attest and or testify to what they believe or what they see as the concerns in the district. I'm emphasizing that because I know some people might say, oh, we just did this in July. Well, in July, it was initial. This is the final, for lack of a better word, public hearing before we go to submit in October. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Carly. Outside of me jumping in when you're taking over more than 3 minutes, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so at this point, we're opening the public hearing. We don't have so many attendees here today, but we would love to hear from our attendees who are not on the committee. We'd love to hear from you about what you perceive our needs to be. So if you would like to participate and provide testimony during this public hearing, please raise your hand. I see one raised hand. Crystal Glover, I'm going to allow you to speak, and then I'm going to start the clock. Okay, go ahead, Crystal.
Good evening. My name's Crystal Glover. I come to these meetings because I like to know what's going on. I like to just sit and listen, and I'm learning a lot from the Community Board 11 in this year. I'm learning a lot because being the east side from East Harlem, you don't get to, it's like the tumbleweed blowing in the wind. There's a lot going on, but if you're not tuned in, you won't know what's going on. So it appears that nothing's going on. That being said, me being a former tenant association president, a lot of information I found out was always through a Hummer or having a conversation maybe with a consultant or something who was trying to what's the word? Trying to partner up with us and stuff like that as a community. And so I heard someone mention a budget request trackers found. So me just being nosy, I'd like to know what that is. And thank you so much for this meeting. And I will continue to come and listen and learn. Thanks.
Thank you. So what I am hearing from you is that, it's hard for community residents to, even though there's a lot going on in the district, it's hard for, a lot of people don't know about it. So what I'm hearing is, a need for, more comprehensive community engagement. Is that correct?
Like for instance, I won't be long-winded because I know y'all really deal with time is important. Like for instance, you have a lot of New Yorkers, they just think that going to work, coming home and locking the doors is everything. But they don't realize there's the city council, there's the community boards, there's resident associations, there's MTA, that they don't realize all these entities and they just exist. And a lot of them are snooty and their noses are up. Oh, I go to work every day. I go to work every day. So you people who don't work, you are non-entities and that type of thing. But they don't realize that their tax money is being abused and spent like crazy. And I mean, I can go on and on. I can talk about HUD and how much money they give to NYCHA, tenant associations for, they give it to them. Did you hear what I'm saying? And when you don't spend it, they pinch off of it, NYCHA. I can talk about all of these things. And so by the community not, city council, they always talk about their liaisons or their constituents. That's the word they like to use. Oh, well, I hear from my constituents and they tell me la la la, and all kind of thing here, or what's it up there? So, and so the streets are like mad filthy in East Harlem, and it got to the point where I was contacting sanitation, I was sending emails to Gail Brewer's office, and I'm starting to see things happen. And I'm not in any registered organization right now. I'm just freelancing and advocating. And so I guess I'm saying that to say this. You have council of presidents and district council of presidents and all this kind of stuff going, all these titles, and you look around you and you still see the tumbleweed blowing into what you call it. And so I'm sorry. But and so like looking at this public hearing right now on district needs, you see meat and potatoes, you see the budget breakdowns and all this good stuff. You even had a town hall and all this kind of stuff here. And if we could just get all this info to the people, I hate to keep talking about NYCHA, but I am a NYCHA resident, former president, and I know that tenants just don't have a desire to know anything. I only have the desire because my mother is a founder of resident associations or tenant associations, as it was called in the 70s. So I'm the little girl that was hanging on her leg, dragging on, going with her to meetings and stuff. So that's why it's in my blood. But if we can just get the people of East Harlem, the young boys and girls, the single mothers, the single fathers, and all these kind of people, even the associations and the block associations, etc., even the gangsters and the mobsters, if we can get everybody on the same page and just have discussions about stuff, then maybe something can get done. The last thing I would really, really like to say, Commissioner Dermochet made a statement today about, I think it was 3 young men murdered in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and I believe Manhattan in a matter of like 2 days or something. And then he said the last kid had a rap sheet as long as his arm. And then I thought about the kid in New Jersey, the little Latina brother, 16, who was a track and field expert in a high school. He didn't have a rap sheet long as his arm, but he brought up the boy with the rap sheet. And so I'm only bringing that up, even though it's not on the agenda, but I'm bringing it up, Committee Board 11, if you guys can do something, have maybe a workshop or something relating to why we're losing so many young men between 16 and 34. This is all day, every day, they're being shot up. It's on the news 24/7 here in New York City, and it's not being talked about. Zero, except when it's aired on the news, and that's it. And so it needs to be, it is in your district needs FY2023. I did see it, in there and stuff like that. But it's this, we're talking about a pandemic, or for lack of a better word, with these killings of these Latina and African American boys and girls. Thank you. I hope that wasn't too much.
That was beautifully said. Thank you so much for your testimony.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was very well said.
Do we have anybody else who would like to testify tonight? If so, please raise your hand.
While we wait for that, Carly, I got from that, I do agree. I got comprehensive community engagement, and then the second one was youth and education.
Yeah, specifically around gun violence and yeah. So I'm not seeing any further hands. So I will give it another minute before we close the public hearing. Okay, seeing no further hands, the public hearing is now closed. Thank you so much, Crystal, for your testimony. We really appreciate it. And if you could, in the future, bring some of, one thing I wanted to say was never apologize for bringing up NYCHA. I think I could speak on behalf of all of our committee members when we say we want to hear from, more NYCHA residents, seeing as we have so many NYCHA developments in our district. So the more engagement, the better. So thank you so much. And if you could bring your neighbors then to our meetings, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you could always send over feedback about how we can make our meetings more, more accessible. So
you are very welcome. I know and that minute of silence we want to dedicate to the Latina and African American boys being slaughtered on the streets. That 1 minute of silence we can dedicate to them. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Crystal, and I agree. We definitely will. I don't see anything else. I wish we would have had all those people that were at full board. I thought we were gonna have, most of them were here at budget hall. So, but I know we caught that sentiment and that constant concern about quality of life, and it was discussed elaborately yesterday. So I don't have any old business. We do have the minutes. I don't know if Xavier would like to talk a little bit about, Carly already expressed what happened yesterday, but I do think that the thought process of a budget tracker versus a project tracker, we used to have project trackers, which were just specific to the committee. We did that for years, and that kind of fell to the wayside. I do recommend to the vice chairs, and we could talk about that offline. We don't have to bury the meeting today about it, but I will emphasize, and that's because I'm a project manager, so I like to track projects. So if I am on a committee, when I was on youth and education, I used to track all the projects that youth and education would do outside of the statement of district needs. So then on top of me having my budget request tracker, it made it that much more easier when I went to go submit requests to not be redundant on something that we already knew we were working on. But I could feed more into that too during the course of the month. I put my phone number and my email in the chat. I pretty much have everybody here except probably some of the newer members. Don't hesitate to communicate or contact me. I promise you, I'll tell you when I'm busy, and if I'm not, I'll pick up the phone and I'll get back to you. I think it's really important for us to have fluid communication over the course of the next 30 to 60 days. One, so you're confident in your practice, and two, I'm ensured that the work is getting done. So that way, you know, our chair can keep giving us kudos, our chair of the board, that is, for the great work that you're all doing. So Xavier, unless you want to speak to something about from last night from executive, because unfortunately, I will tell on myself I wasn't there. I had a class. Unless anybody else has any old business.
Yeah, Jason, I'll
there you go,
come.
sir.
Yeah. So we did miss you. You were missed. You know, virtual hugs, right? We really got into and engaged the committee a bit more to really dive into it, and thank you, Carly, for being there. To kind of give some of our newer members context is that the budget process prior to this committee being enshrined in our bylaws was, I don't want to say archaic, but it went through many incarnations about how we select our priorities. Some were through internal surveys, some were through discussions at committee. It was never as formalized until now. And when we passed the bylaws, voted to have this as a standing committee along with land use, we determined that it was necessary early on that we would like to have all the vice chairs of each committee sit there. It has taken this long to make that happen because at the time we had standing chairs or vice chairs, and this is just the course of moving a representative body toward an end goal, and now we are seeing the fruits of those labors. As you onboard, it is important to keep in context that the process, and as he talked about budget trackers, project trackers, the original model was built off of ensuring that we're seeing how each request goes throughout the course of time. And it is now involved to its current state, as would naturally happen with any new model that's created, to where we can actually follow up. We can determine, has it been approved? Have they actually applied it? Where is it now? If it hasn't, if it's been partially funding, how much remains? Who else needs to be liaised? Because you'll see the responses from the city agencies will be like, oh, well, that's partially funding, or go talk to your council member, or that's a state issue, or that's a federal. They will, in some cases, punt. So just as a kind of to give you context of where we are today, we are in a more fully realized state from from our original inception, and this is the vision coming to full manifestation. So I just want to remind all the members here that you are part of that process and you are valued, and I appreciate you all being here. It's been a pleasure working with Jason to make this happen. Now, as for last night, we went through it. We got into the weeds a bit. Some of it seemed patently obvious. The main issues we were, I would say, hung up on were the homelessness versus affordable housing, and the fact that it is a drop-down menu when you put this in. We don't have, it's not a combine, it's not as a Boolean and affordable housing and that we could select. It's one or the other. And we discussed with public safety and how that housing instability is one of the greatest issues that, and especially right now during the pandemic, that our community is facing. And as I like to coin the phrase, righting the wrongs of Robert Moses, with the highest concentration of affordable housing. And if you drew a circle around all of northern Manhattan, the South Bronx, you'd find the highest concentration of public housing than any other place in the planet. So this being said, we are dealing with decisions that were made before a lot of us were on this planet. And as a result, as we've dealt with this pandemic, it's our job to take this on board, to make these choices so we can correct and provide for this community. And yes, we are in the granular side of it, and we make our decisions and we move forward. And so there was a bit of that discussion, how that comes together. So when we went through executive committee last night, we asked for each committee chair to weigh in on what the committee discussed. We went back and forth and we settled where we did, and then we expanded on the policy decisions that you're now seeing that were presented by Carly today. And I think if, and these very well may change, because we have a new, and this is something I want all of our membership to keep in mind, we have a new administration coming in. And that is something that we need to be knocking on our mayor's door and all the agencies and the heads that he will appoint. Granted that the current Democratic nominee wins, but which is most likely to be the case, it's incumbent upon us to keep chasing that down, because they're going to want to get the real work done. So that's something to keep in mind. The items were presented as such, and that's a little bit behind the curtain. Thank you, Jason. I don't want to take any more time. We had a long meeting last night, and let's not make this one as such.
Thank you, sir. Carly, you got anything for us?
No.
Okay, so we can move on. There's nothing but new business when we come to these meetings. Carly gave it to you all in the presentation, the first hour and 15 minutes. Next. Roll call and adjournment. Meetings adjourned at, oh, yes. Carly, please do take attendance. I apologize.
Okay.
I was getting too comfortable.
Arroyo,
I saw her on and then dropped. I sent her a text just for something to hint. And then, I'm sorry, just to jump in for attendance, Jason Wu is excused.
Brown,
Present.
Green,
Out.
Malave,
Here.
McCullough, Morris, Jessica, I
I'm
know.
here. I was here, yeah, at the beginning, but I wasn't here to say here, but I was here. I'm here
Thank
now.
you, Jessica. Padilla,
By a thread.
Perez,
Here.
Santiago,
Here.
Yenueva,
Present.
and Wu, excused. Okay, that's all. Have a good night.
Good night. Meetings adjourned 8:10 p.m. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Good night,